Hi, I got a mic. It's only $15, so hopefully the audio is much better. It's not one of those fancy mics, but who knows? Maybe I'll get a fancy mic sometime in the future. But for now, we'll work with this mic. Big question that I get asked a lot from students and alumni from my college is how much home can I buy, right? How do you figure out how much you can afford? And that's a tricky question because most people just think if I can pay that mortgage with my existing rent, then I should be good to go. But that's not always the case because it can get tricky because you have other hidden additional costs that you don't really take into account and it doesn't really come up until you start your home buying process. But hopefully we can shine some light on that before you get too deep into the process. So if you look online about how much home you can buy, you're going to find a bunch of calculators online, and some of them may be useful, some of them not so much, right? So it really depends on where you're looking, but my favorite just happens to be Google's calculator. If you just quickly Google, hey, home mortgage calculator, you'll find something. And there's a lot of terms here that you might not understand if you've never been through the home buying process or had a loan in your life. And some would argue, even if you had a loan in your life, it's difficult to remember these terms and really understand them and how they can impact your financial life. My approach to how I figured out how much home I can buy. I can tell you right off the bat that I didn't pick a number out of thin air. Instead, I did research, right, to figure out was this number accurate, right? Was this number that was reflective of the industry? The median price of a home in the US is more than $400,000, right? And that's a pretty hefty figure. And if you look in New Jersey and New York, it's 408 and $517 and $371,880 respectively. And these numbers will vary depending on what your source is. The most important thing is you figure out your neighborhood, right, as close as possible. So in Hudson County, the median price of a home is $562,000, right? Pretty big number. New York City actually broke this down by each borough if you're curious, and definitely figure out the median price of a home in your area. And obviously, the higher your number is, the more you're going to have to save and pay for a mortgage. Now, I will say that costs are rising, right? The cost to own a home is rising, and historical trends tend to show that homes increase in price. So just keep that in mind that the number you see right now is probably going to be much higher once you actually start buying a home, right? And that will differ depending on the neighborhood that you are in. So it's important that we start with the mortgage and not the home price, right? Everyone likes to say, hey, I want to buy $1 million home, but what does that look like on a month-to-month basis? Unless, of course, you're paying all cash. In that case, you don't need to watch this video. You could just go out there and buy any home you want. But if you're like most of the United States, you're going to have a mortgage. And a mortgage just means it replaces your rent for the most part, right? That's the simplest way to explain it. So when you think of a mortgage, it's essentially a loan, right? And two parts that you can break it up into are the mortgage monthly payments. So this is how much you would pay per month to pay toward your mortgage. And then you have to think about the actual money required upfront to buy the home. So the mortgage monthly payment is a little bit difficult to calculate because there are some numbers you can calculate right now and some numbers you can't calculate right now. And the best you can make an estimate, right? So the principal and interest are numbers that you can calculate right now. If you don't know, the principal is the amount of money that you borrowed from the bank, right? And then the interest is the amount of money charged by the bank to make money for themselves, right? Interest rates will change over time. You can explore the interest rates at this link over here. But generally speaking, interest rates right now are at an all-time low. And if you're going to buy a home, this is probably the best time to do so. We could only see interest rates going up in the future. But again, who really knows? Right now, we can say that they're at a historical low. The costs that you can't calculate right away are PMI, home insurance, and taxes. Those things are a little tricky, and it's hard to figure out what they are until you actually speak to a lender. And even then, they can only give you an estimate until you get closer to closing. Right, so PMI is private mortgage insurance. So if you plan to put less than 20% down, you're going to have to pay this. And it will vary from person to person depending on what their financial situation is like. Home insurance will also vary from person to person. As you know, insurance is a little tricky in the United States. But you can get sort of an average down, right? An average based on your state that you can find at this link here. Now, taxes will vary from property to property and from neighborhood to neighborhood. Taxes generally go up, so you can expect to pay more. Luckily for us, we can find taxes on the home that you're looking at, right? They'll publicly state how much taxes they're paying per year and the previous years for this home. So that's something that you can see, but you can't really figure out what it is until you pick a home. Now, the actual money required to buy a home up front can be broken up into two parts: the down payment and the closing costs, right? The down payment most of you will know it's a one-time upfront payment that you make to reduce the amount of money that you borrow, and it counts toward your home equity. For example, if you were to purchase a $400,000 home and you want to put 20% down, that will be $80,000. And then $320,000 is how much you have left in the principal remaining. Right? So right off the bat, you own $60,000 worth of your home, and over a period of time, you'll pay off the $320,000 that you borrowed from the lender. Now, the closing costs are a little tricky because you don't get this money back. Basically, you have to pay people to help you along your home purchasing process, right? So this includes your lender, this includes your lawyer, right, or attorney, and you can't really figure what this number is right away, but for most people, conservatively, we can estimate somewhere around 4 to 5% for the cost, right? For example, a $400,000 home would cost somewhere between $16,000 to $20,000 to close, right? Remember, this is money you don't get back. So the actual money required up front to buy a home on the conservative side will be the down payment of $80,000 and the closing costs of $20,000, which will put you at $100,000 to close on a home. And it's difficult to save up that amount, but again, you don't always have to put down a 20% down, right? There's other options. Just keep in mind that you have to pay for PMI, right? And the loan will change depending on what parameters you change, right? Whether it's, I want a longer loan, I want to borrow more money. Obviously, if you borrow more money, it will increase the amount you have to pay each month as mortgage. Now, if we walk through the calculator example, right? What if we put down a $400,000 home for 20% down, right? What if we put down a $350,000 home for 20% down? The numbers will change, and just try out different numbers, get a good idea about what those numbers are. And if you're curious, how do I find how much the home price is? Well, look in your neighborhood, right? Look in your desired neighborhood and find out what price those homes are going for, because you have to be realistic, right? You have to save for a home and not say, hey, I have $50,000. What can I buy? Now, remember to give yourself a buffer, right? Just because the mortgage amount is, say, $1,000, it doesn't mean you're only paying $1,000, because home ownership is a different ball game altogether. Just because you have a bunch of additional costs associated with the home itself, right? Like repairs, taxes, right? Anything outside the mortgage is sort of included, right? These calculators are only going to give you at best just the mortgage number, but they don't give you home insurance, they don't give you taxes, they don't give you PMI, right? So there's a whole bunch of other factors involved here. So give yourself a nice buffer, right? Don't just say, hey, I pay this much of rent, so I can pay this much in mortgage. Right? It's not one-to-one. The next thing is to pick a budget you're comfortable with. Only you know your financial goals, right? And the best person to ask is yourself. How much can I afford realistically, and also save for my other goals like retirement, right? Or starting a business or having kids, right? All of these goals will depend on where you're coming from and what you're comfortable with. Just keep in mind that the target home price will fluctuate with the market. So you're going to have to be willing to make trade-offs here and there to make the home price that you selected work. You want to make sure that you set the parameters for what you buy. Don't let the attorney, don't let the agent, don't let the lender tell you how much home you should buy. You should be coming into those conversations knowing exactly how much you can afford and how much you want to buy and for what, right? Obviously, you're willing to give up things or make trade-offs, right? Depending on the home value selected, but definitely you should be the one to dictate how much home you are buying, right? Because the lender is always going to tell you how much money you can borrow, like the maximum amount. But the maximum amount means, hey, you can't save for retirement, you can't afford to have, you can't pay for education, right? You can't pay for other professional goals, right? So the max amount is really going to impact your financial picture in the future, right? So it's very important that you don't do the maximum, because lenders will want you to do the maximum because that's how they make the most money. So when you come into those conversations, you always want to tell lenders how much you're going to buy a home for, right? How much you're looking to buy for. And that's how I came into these conversations, right? I never had the lender tell me how much home I can buy. All that they tell me was, this number I selected, is it realistic or not? And if it's not realistic, what number is more realistic, right? Because if it's realistic, then it should be similar to your own research, right? That means you've done enough research. If you get a number entirely different, you either have a bad lender or you didn't do your research correctly. So it's very important that you really dig into your market, understand what you're looking for, and figure out how much home that you can buy, right? There's a lot of resources out there to help you understand what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, right? There's a bunch of rules out there that don't make sense in a high cost of living area. So if you live in a high cost of living area like New York City, right, or the metropolitan area in general, these numbers aren't going to make sense, right? You can't, I'm going to say right now, you can't, some people say you should spend 30% of your budget on home related costs. It's not going to happen in a metropolitan area or in the high cost of living area because you just don't make enough money, right? It's just unrealistic to do that given what the home prices are, given what rent is even, right? So it's important to keep in mind that everyone's going to look a little bit different and your financial picture is going to differ, but just make sure that whatever amount you pay in mortgage, including taxes, PMI, insurance, that you still have enough left over each month to live the life that you want and to save for your future financial goals, right? Crunch the math, right? Before you even do anything, you should have a budget, right? So if you don't have a budget, don't even think about buying a home because how can you possibly know how much home you can afford if you don't know how much you're spending today? Hopefully that was helpful and hopefully that gave you a bunch of links and research, details to dig into. And I'll see you next time then. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. And tell me how the mic is because the last 2 videos were a little difficult to hear with the echo. But hopefully the echo will be gone in this one.